for the challenge. I appreciate it. So as he has said, my name is Zivayi Nengomasha. I know a lot of people like to know who they are talking to, so I'll just put that into context for the purposes of knowing. So my background is such that my first degree is actually in agriculture and natural resources, and I majored in animal science. And then I did my master's at University of Edinburgh in resource management. And I did my PhD at University of Edinburgh again and majored in rangeland ecology. Basically still animal science, but looking at livestock that are being raised free ranging and how to effectively use natural resources. So that has been my major. So for 11 years of my career, I worked actively in research, doing a lot of research in animal science, animal nutrition, rangeland ecology. And that was a big passion. And then at some point, I then started to move into the human-animal interface. Just exploring how we can take advantage of the livestock research that we were generating to actually support people out of poverty with the livestock related interventions. So I started doing that. And that is how I found myself getting into the development sector. So it became quite interesting for me to see how what we generate in research can be useful to actually alleviate poverty. Then about, oh gosh, I've lost count, but some years, more than 10 years ago, I then made the full transition into international development work. And I have worked in Zimbabwe. I'm a Zimbabwean citizen living in Kenya. So I worked in Zimbabwe as a programs director in an NGO. Then I was a country director, and then I then moved to the regional office for ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, where I am also the programs and planning director covering West, East, and Southern Africa. So we have oversight for 34 ADRA country offices in Africa south of the Sahara. So on a day-to-day basis, I am usually supporting technically in terms of designing programs to address community challenges, and also providing technical support in terms of food security and livelihoods, because that's my technical background, and also engaging in strategic planning. So that's basically me. I'm married with 2 children. One is an adult, she's already in university, and another one is 17 and struggling with online school. so that's basically the story of my life. Now, today's presentation is quite an interesting one for me. I hope you can see my screen. It's quite an interesting one for me because I am very passionate and concerned when it comes to issues of inclusion and exclusion. And I would say my antennas are very high on issues of inclusion and exclusion. I'm very particular about discrimination of any sort. And you will see why this is a relevant line for me to add to this. So today we are going to look at the role of stakeholder engagement in community development work. Now, this topic in itself is extremely broad because you can confine it to professional stakeholders only, or you can extend it to include communities. But my bias is a lot towards the community. And so you will see that my examples will tend to be biased towards that. So in terms of the outline of the presentation, we will start with a basic definition of what a stakeholder is so that we can all have a common working definition. And from there, we will look at types of stakeholders, then the stakeholder interests, the nature of community development, and the community as a stakeholder, and then the definition itself of stakeholder engagement, its purpose, and what community participation is all about, and the process of engagement, and stakeholder management, because we don't only engage them for no apparent reason. And then, of course, the best practices in stakeholder management and our evaluation of stakeholder engagement process. So what we are hoping at the end of the day is that we will have a better appreciation of what stakeholder engagement is all about. So as a way of introduction, I just want you to consider a situation in your family or in your workplace where you have really felt excluded, yet you thought that your input is relevant or whatever is being discussed is relevant. I will give a very African example. So the African example goes something like this. So when a woman gets married, her people where she was born will say, you now belong to your husband's family. The husband's family will always say, we brought you here, but you belong to your own people. So in so many ways, that woman belongs nowhere, because her own people, if she goes there to say, I don't think we should be managing our land this way, that they'll say, hey, go and focus where you are married. She goes to focus where she's married, the people there will say, hey, remember that we brought you here. You are a stranger amongst us, so you cannot be talking about our things. So there are also cultural practices that perpetuate exclusion. And exclusion in itself is not a problem, but exclusion becomes a problem when you believe you should be included, or indeed when your exclusion means that whatever the outcome is going to affect you and you are voiceless to influence what comes out of it. So on that note, what then is a stakeholder? So stakeholders, they are those who may be affected by or have an effect on an effort. It doesn't matter what the effort is. If we are sweeping and it is a dusty day and my windows are open and someone is sweeping outside, the fact that the dust can affect me, I am a stakeholder in your sweeping exercise. So all I'm saying is that it can be as simple as that. It could be that my neighbor is having a party. You know, where I live, they are called mansionettes, which means that we live close to our neighbors. And when they have a party, and it goes on until late at night, and they have not even said, sorry, neighbors, I'm going to have a party. It's affecting me. I am a stakeholder. So those who may be affected by or have an effect, they are stakeholders. So they can be individuals, they can be groups, they can be organizations, they can be businesses that have an interest or concern in the community. If they have an interest or a concern, then they are actually, and they qualify to be stakeholders. And they can affect or be affected by the community's actions, the community's policies, and the community's objectives. I remember when we were making a decision to move to Kenya, my daughter was 11, because we came to Kenya 2011. And when we were discussing with my husband and we discussed, and then we said, okay, let's brief the children. The younger one was quite young, but he still was understanding what was happening, but the 11-year-old. And then she just came in and she said, I know I am not 18 and I don't have a right to vote, but I am a member of this family and my voice should also be heard. Why hasn't anybody asked me how I feel about moving? And we were all shocked because we thought this is an adult decision and we announce what we have decided. But from that point, because she declared her position as a stakeholder, and to say what you're deciding is going to affect me, at least hear me out. That's when we sat down and we allowed her to be part of, you know, as far as she could understand as an 11-year-old, but to participate in our process to improve her level of buy-in and excitement about the move. So stakeholders are also persons with an interest or a concern in something. And the Project Management Institute says these are individuals and organizations who are actively involved in the project, or whose interests may be positively or negatively affected as a result of project execution or successful project implementation. So I think it makes it very clear to us in terms of what exactly a stakeholder is. So with that clear definition, we also have others, of course, who will say they are those interested in your project outcome. So they might not be interested in the process, but in what your intervention will bring. Or they are typically members of a project team, or the project managers, or the executives, or the sponsors or donors, or customers or users. So they are a wide range, and they are invested in the project and who will be affected by your project at any point along the way. And their input can directly impact your outcome. Now, the thing is, the nature of a stakeholder and the effects can vary along the life of a project. So it is not only confined to one place in time or one space in time, but it could actually be throughout the life of the project. So having said that, we can consider that there are three types of stakeholders that we want to think about. So there's the primary stakeholder, and these are people of groups who stand to be directly affected, whether positively or negatively, by whatever we are doing in community development. And the secondary stakeholders are those who are indirectly affected, whether it's positive or negative. And then our key stakeholders, they might belong to both. Either they are primary or they are secondary, but what makes them key? They themselves can have a positive or negative effect. Now, a good example is government. We all know that in the development agenda belongs to national governments. It does not belong to non-governmental organizations. And we come in as NGOs to complement what the government is actually doing. So in as much as they might be primary or they might be secondary, they are usually a key stakeholder. So it's also very useful for us to understand that. And of course, stakeholders have different interests, or whatever is at stake can vary from one to the other. So it could be the economics, it could be the stakeholder because they are interested in social change or they are affected by the social change, or it could be for a short time that you are a stakeholder, after which you cease to be one. It could be an interest in the environment, protecting our environment and how to, especially here in Africa where we have so much deforestation, we have the Sahel region where the desert is advancing at a not a frightening speed. Actually, we have flooding in certain areas, so there could be that interest. Or it could be an interest in physical health or in safety and security or in mental health. There are many interests that a stakeholder can have. And really the nature of the interest depend upon what the intervention is all about. So with that clarity in mind, we want to just briefly consider the nature of community development. Now, the community development dynamic is complex. It is very complex because first of all, look at yourself as an individual. You are already complicated to yourself before we even start to bring other people around you. Now, look at a community. They have complexities in terms of the challenges that they experience. And these challenges tend to be intertwined and interlinked, sometimes so complicated that we are not able to pull these things apart. In fact, one of the reasons why, let's say when we are writing proposals, we like to use the logical framework is because we want to engage in linear thinking. But in truth, there is no challenge in the community which is linear. It doesn't exist. The challenges in the community require systems approaches. And systems approaches are non-linear because there are so many areas that need to be addressed at the same time to then fully bring the desired developmental progress or outcomes that we would like. So we are dealing with very complex communities. So with that complexity, there is no one organization, no one intervention which can then fully address the issues that are in a community. So we really need to consider very seriously taking a systems approach. And a systems approach in and of itself requires multiple actors. So you cannot have a fully fledged addressing of the complexity of issues in a community when you are a single actor, because the other side of the coin is that you don't have the monopoly of all the skills that are needed. So you have multiple actors. So with multiple actors, it means that you actually have also multiple stakeholders. So you cannot come in and say you're the only stakeholder, you're the only one who can address you, are the only one. You don't need other stakeholders to make things happen. So community participation, when we consider it like at the community level, it's really saying recognize all these different players who qualify to be stakeholders and look at the role they play and engage them strategically in order to achieve what you'd like to achieve. So the community, all these communities we work with, I know we normally like to call them beneficiaries. And beneficiary is a term which is quite derogatory because it makes us superior and makes them subservient to us, recipients of our kindness and the generosity. And yet, if we look at it very well, we are actually equal partners and they are players. So this, when you consider the community, communities are groups of people with similar problems. And they can be a community because of their, geographical areas, so a village, a township, and so forth. And now, stakeholder engagement. Now that we have this background clearly, stakeholder engagement is a meaningful involvement of stakeholders in policy and in program development. I would like you to emphasize meaningful, because sometimes we engage in what we call tokenism. And tokenism is just to tick a box so that we can look like we are inclusive, but in reality, we are not. So meaningful. And they are engaged and they play an active role in defining issues. So if you want to have meaningful engagement, all stakeholders must be able to define issues. That is why when we are doing a needs assessment, even if you are doing, let's say, using the focus group discussions, you say, who should we involve in the focus group? If you're going to do key informant interviews, you say, who should we involve? Yes, you can have random surveys as well, but you target a particular community. Why? Because you are allowing them to be part of the process of defining issues. So you define issues and you consider solutions together, and you identify resources and priorities for action. I remember in one of my first research activities that I did as a fresh graduate working in a research institute. So I was really excited about foraging behavior, which I even ended up doing for my PhD. So I go to a community to discuss with them that, we need to start, assessing the range lengths to see where the resources are and to look at resource gaps. So, these elders, they looked at me, they listened, very polite people, they listened. And then when I finished talking, they said, young lady, listen to us very, very well. You want to study what our animals eat when our animals don't even have water to drink. Our greatest need right now is water for the animals to drink, not you understanding where the resources are and whatever. If you are not bringing water for our livestock, get lost. And believe me, I had to get lost because unfortunately, and maybe this is a discussion for another day, I was holding a grant from a donor to study resources, not to provide water for livestock. So I could not divert donor resources. So it just wasn't matching for that community. So identify solutions and resources, and then meaningful involvement should take place at all stages of community initiative. You will be surprised. What I've come to learn over the years is that if I cannot simplify a concept for the community to understand, it means I don't understand it. Because most of the time, we actually claim that the reason why we are excluding communities at every stage is because they don't understand. But what we are actually not saying is because we don't understand it well enough to simplify it. And also, it means we are making an assumption about the community and their intelligence and intellect. And most of the time, it's actually quite insulting, but that's a discussion for another day. So we engage, why do we engage them, stakeholders in community development? A couple of reasons. But when we engage stakeholders, we end up with more ideas of how to challenge, how to address community challenges. So rather than just sticking to what we know, we start to have a cross-fertilization of ideas. And it allows us to have varied perspectives on issues. It also gains buy-in and support. The reason why a lot of the interventions that we do are unsustainable is because there is no buy-in. So by the time we come in as outsiders to implement a project, and when we are done with that project, we now announce to say, oh, we are leaving, they say it is okay. And then they will call you and say, please come and repair your borehole, because it doesn't even belong to them. They don't see it as their own. They are not bothered about it. So when you have buy-in, it means that your efforts can be sustainable. The gains that are made by what you are implementing can be sustained beyond the life of the project. It's also fair. It's also fair. The way that you feel excluded and you are upset that you are not part of the discourse is the way that the communities are. The fact that they are in a disadvantaged position or situation does not make it right for us as development practitioners to exclude them out of their own developmental agenda. And then, of course, it saves you from being blindsided by concern you didn't know. Now, there's one community in Zimbabwe, they are very interesting people. They are very polite. So you go there, you say what you want to say, they don't say anything, they don't say anything, they listen, they listen, they listen. When you leave, they do what they want. So you think that you are together because they have not said a thing, but they will still just do what they want. So you are not going to be blindsided when you involve. And it strengthens your position if there is any opposition. You see, because when you engage stakeholders, you understand what their interests are, you understand what their issues are, and you start to work with them to address these things. They are less likely to oppose you, like head on, but they will certainly start to cooperate with you. So where there's a lot of antagonism, it is very useful to engage the stakeholders. And then it creates bridging social capital for the community. It creates connections that might not actually be there at the point when you are thinking about them or wanting about them. So when you have diverse people, involvement of stakeholders bridges the gap and allows people to join together for a common cause. And then, of course, it increases credibility of your organization and the chances of success. So why would you not engage stakeholders just based on this? So it's important because stakeholder engagement helps us to define community problems together and to develop solutions together and to share knowledge and lessons together and to disseminate this information. You see, sometimes we struggle a lot in terms of how we disseminate even best practices. But if all stakeholders are involved, let's say as an NGO, you're doing an agriculture intervention, Yeah, I'm talking about agriculture because that's what I hear. That's my background. So you are having an agriculture intervention, and the Ministry of Agriculture is already actively engaged as a stakeholder. And you have identified other civil society groups whose focus is also related to agriculture. By the time you actually finish that project, it has been disseminated. You don't even have to struggle to have it spread widely. And if you don't remember anything, engagement means participation. So when you engage me, you are extending a hand and an invitation for me to participate. So of course, there are different ways of viewing issues of community participation, and Einstein came up with a ladder of citizen participation, and you can replace the word citizen with community. And you can see that most of us, by the way, we are at this non-participation stage where we are just trying to manipulate things. So we are not really giving the community a chance to engage meaningfully. So we engage in our tokenism, okay? So it's just a token. It is non-participation and it is manipulative at that stage. And then, of course, the next stage is just this whole tokenism where you're just informing them. So you go to the government office and you say, oh, we've just come to inform you that we've secured funding from USAID and this is what we are going to be doing. Well, that is actually not participation. It's tokenism. You are just ticking a box. And consultation, what do you think about this? But you're not part of it. So I'm just asking you what you think about it, but you're not part of it. And then, of course, the level that we would like to get to is when we start to partner with our stakeholders. When we even start to delegate power and where the community is really in control of its own development agenda. This stakeholder engagement should aspire to get to that level of participation, especially when we consider the communities where we are working. You could also think of it this way, that you can start at the bottom with just co-option and then just compliance. Did you inform the government? Yes. Did you inform the rural district council? Yes. Did you inform the women's group? Yes. Did you inform the interracial whatnot, you know, Meredith is coming from US where this one is a hot potato. Yes, she ticks, just compliance. But the consultation is just to ask you, so what do you think? But then we get to cooperation. But the next level we desire is the core learning, where we come in as development practitioners and we say, let's learn together. And then, of course, collective action, and then collaboration. So that is what we would like to see in our stakeholder engagement. So do not be satisfied to just tick a box of compliance. We need to go beyond that. So we can then say, we can engage in a strategic conversation with the community to facilitate learning, change, and commitment. So this is just saying the same thing, where it is really a cycle and it does not end and we continue like that. And then, of course, when we consider participation, this is another way of looking at it. I just brought in different ways of looking at it from different authors to make the point. So it can be passive, just sharing information. It can be interactive. So we're just action planning, controlling over decisions. And then it can be functional, like the groups that we like to form in the communities, the committees and the goal setting, or it can be at an optimal level where we even analyze participation and say, who should be participating? Who is not here? Why are they not here? We need to engage them. And analysis of our effectiveness. Is this really bringing out the desired change that we would like in terms of the participation? And then, of course, control over our operations. And all these components contribute to our project sustainability. And probably that can explain why some of our interventions are not sustainable beyond the life of the project. So engagement is about learning. It's about commitment. It is not about power, because most of the time we think it's about power and control. And we are afraid to engage stakeholders because we want to hold the reins. But it's interactive and adaptive. As we interact, we adapt. Of course, you know what is actually interesting, and this is, of course, most of you already know, that the concept of adaptive management in project management has become big. And the reason why it has become big is, as long as there is interaction, there will be need for adaptation. We cannot have interaction which does not result in us adapting how we are doing things, when we are doing things, with whom we are doing, or even what we are doing. So it consists of listening, it consists of repeating to affirm, it consists with checking. Is this what you mean? This is meaningful engagement. And it's about people owning what they help to create. You know, imagine the pride that a stakeholder, let's take the community as the stakeholder, as I said, this will be my emphasis. And the community members can actually say, you know, we had this discussion with this NGO, we had this idea, we agreed to do this, you know, and look at it. What we did not have were the resources to do this, but it was actually our idea and we worked together. Do you not see that the community will work hard to protect that which they have helped to create? But if they don't own it and it's not part of theirs and you have come in therapeutic, then they can actually outrightly reject what you have brought to the table. And it's investment wasted. So the process is that we share information, we encourage exploration of options and choices. And then, of course, we have a feedback loop. But I just want to bring in a caveat there. You see, the challenge with the complete stakeholder engagement has a lot to do with the fact that we depend on donor funds for what we do. And sometimes we do not have enough time to engage, because the dynamics of engagement can take time. Because you can move from suspicion to trust. Building trust takes time. So sometimes it doesn't fit in the project cycle and we make mistakes. And this is why, as a development practitioner, it makes sense to be in a community for a long time, so that there is already trust, there is already that traction, and you are able to engage meaningfully. So how do we do it? Well, we need to understand it first. We need to understand and place each stakeholder in their own place. So ResearchGate actually produced this, and it's a good one, because on the horizontal axis, it's talking about the interests. What are the interests of this stakeholder? And on the y-axis, we have the power. So if you consider a particular stakeholder, you will say, what interests do they have? And what power do they have? And you place them, and whichever part you place them in these boxes will determine to you the nature of engagement. For example, if you have high power, which is up here, and high interest, which is up here, it means that these are high power, these are highly interested, and they should be managed closely. Because imagine a stakeholder who has power to make or break your intervention, and then they are very interested. If you don't manage them closely, they can actually completely sabotage what you're doing. And then you have those with high power, but they are less interested. So their interest is low, so they are somewhere here. And these ones, you just keep them satisfied, because they can activate their power to also deal with you, or to sabotage, or to protest if they are not happy. So keep them satisfied. They have little involvement, but they have little vested interest in your work, but they are very powerful. So, and then the next one is they have low power, but they have high interest. So you need to keep them informed, because they will not break what you are trying to do. And then you have others who have low power and low interest. It's just to monitor in case they shift out of their box. So you will see that in this one is the representation of the same information, depending on, if you like colorful things like me. I thought that might be a useful one also. Yeah. And you can actually then also use a matrix like the one I have put here. The matrices for stakeholder analysis can vary, okay? But at least you need to know the name of your stakeholder and the impact they can have. How much does the project impact them? And then what influence or how much influence do they have over the project? And what is important to them? How can the stakeholder contribute to the project? How can the stakeholder block the project? And based on that, you then come up with a clear strategy for engaging that stakeholder. You don't only come up with a clear strategy for engaging them. It's engagement and management, okay? Always consider these two coming together. So now we touch a bit on stakeholder management. Now, when you have identified your stakeholders, you are clear about the ones where you're going to put in your effort. You are starting to now deliberately engage them, and they're there. You need to manage your stakeholders. A lot of times when we do our stakeholder analysis, let's say we are writing a proposal, most of the time we just say these are our stakeholders, but we hardly ever come up with a strategy for engaging and for managing them. And so we will run through the project and we'll make avoidable mistakes and we will not get the results we want. But we're saying, you know what, we need to manage them where our analysis now and practice meets. That's stakeholder management. So we are not only analyzing information, but our analysis and our practice are coming together. And it allows you to also use that analysis to gain support and buy-in. And stakeholder management must not affect participation. You know what I mean by that is sometimes people start to manage stakeholders for the purposes of manipulating them so that they can support what they want. So you come in, you already know what you want and you want everybody to agree with what you want, but you are not really giving them room. So it should, when your stakeholder management plan or strategy starts to affect participation, you need to revisit it. It could be that it is manipulative. So you need to understand, where does a stakeholder lie? Where are they? At what point are they? What needs the most attention in your relationship with that stakeholder? And your stakeholder management depends on what your purpose is in involving that stakeholder, okay? Let me give you a quick example. So we were implementing a project in a place called Bubi in Matebeleland in Zimbabwe, and it was a maternal health project. We realized that the women were ending up giving birth at home, unassisted, unsupported, because they could not get to the health facilities on time. And we said, but if people could call the ambulance at the general hospital, because they were not too far, then they can come and collect. But we then discovered that the people who own mobile phones are men. And the men were not interested in sharing their mobile phones, even for their own women to be assisted to get to the hospital. And then we had to think, which stakeholder have we excluded who's so important and who can influence these men and their mindsets? And we realized is the religious leaders, because one way or the other, most of the men were affiliated to one religious group or the other. So we had a focused group discussion with the religious leaders. And the discussion was very interesting because we even referred to their own beliefs in terms of the headship of the men. What does it mean when it means that the man is heading the family and protecting the family and whatever? What does it mean in terms of the woman? So they were activated from within their own belief system, and the men became the referral system. So they even assigned each other to say, in this village, you are the one who picks the calls in that village, and this is the scotch card that can be used in this village, and this is the scotch card that can be used if we don't get an ambulance. They got themselves organized. So the stakeholder management plan depends on why you've engaged this particular stakeholder, okay? And of course, people want to feel understood and to feel that their opinions matter. It does not matter what level that person is. I was giving you an example of my daughter. It's the same, even the poorest of the poor in the village, they want to feel understood and that their opinions matter. So some of the ways in which we can manage our stakeholders are find people and project roles that best match their interests and talents. So even at community level, what can they do to engage as an individual or as community groups? And then always treat people with respect, even when tempers rise. By the time you are calling for participation, you are also calling for trouble. Because, you know, if you don't want to quarrel with anybody, sit in your own corner by yourself. By the time somebody else has a different viewpoint, different perspective, you are already clashing, except, you know, if you have good, you know, skills where you are not catching feelings when people have different perspectives and so forth. And then, of course, give praise often. That's a very good thing. Affirm your stakeholders, especially when you notice positive behavior, and then provide training and coaching. Some stakeholders might not be able to bring out their full potential and their full influence because they just need some skills building. So provide this training and then give people opportunities to share their insights and opinions. So we were working with this group in one rural area, and we started to really engage them in community planning. So the good thing is with this particular donor, we could do that. So we could have an annual grant, and then you go and plan with the community. What you've agreed with them is what you will do. So it wasn't tied to a specific, you know, call for proposal, which, you know, fits you in a box. Mm-hmm. So in this community, you know, we engage, we plan together, whatever. Then one day we had a meeting with them. And guess what? We turned up late for the meeting. Remember, we've been training them, empowering them so that as stakeholders, they can fully engage. Now, in their full engagement, they said, so you people think that your time is superior to ours, that our time can be wasted waiting for you. Sorry, this meeting has been canceled and will be postponed because we also have prior commitments. And we were like, what? So when you engage the community as a stakeholder and you empower them, you have to be prepared for them to hold you accountable. And I think this is part of the things that development practitioners do not want. So they would rather just continue with tokenism, because at tokenism level, they can't hold you accountable. But when they become equal partners, collaborators, guess what? You will be held accountable. You will be asked why you think that 9 o'clock is 9 o'clock for us, but not for you. And then it's very sobering. And yet for me, it made me very happy to say there is some empowerment happening here. And they are really taking their development agenda into their hands. So there are a couple of best practices. Of course, there can be many. Many people have framed them differently, but I like these ones. They say, you know, honesty, trust, and integrity is very key in stakeholder engagement. Be very honest. What are the budgetary provisions for this activity? As development practitioners, we are very secretive about the donor funding that we have received for particular activities. That is not good. Trust must be there. And then we must think value and interests and do it transparently. So what is the value here? What are the interests? And be transparent. And it's okay to disagree when we are working with stakeholders, but we have to disagree without being disagreeable. So, because we know that we still need to work together. And yes, we need to comply because a lot of donors are asking us to make sure that we engage stakeholders, but we also still have to act strategically and say, this is beneficial for us. So we are not just ticking a box. and then share the credit. The community in XXX and our organization have done this. Share credit so that even when they are talking, they'll say, we and our partner, we did this. And also, when you share credit, you multiply resources because you've turned them into partners. And then, of course, communicate so you are heard and understood. And more within a project context, the project manager is really responsible for managing the stakeholder engagement and management process. But if you have a program, let's say you are within at an organizational level, it also means that this could mean the directors in the organization and higher. So it depends on the type of stakeholder and the purpose for engagement, who is particularly responsible for this process and for overseeing it. So finally, we need to get into the culture of evaluating our stakeholder engagement processes. Most of the time, we like to evaluate our project. Like, we got into a community, they were harvesting 3 tons per hectare. We wanted them to harvest 10 tons per hectare. We managed to get them to 11 tons per hectare. So we've been very successful. That we have become good at doing, but we've not become good at evaluating our relationships and how we are doing relationships in our development efforts. We need to do this. So some of the questions you can ask: what could you have done better to identify the stakeholders? Because maybe sometimes you get a shock like, what is it? Some of you might be familiar, you might not be familiar with the concept of outcome mapping, and I would encourage you to look at it, because what I like about outcome mapping is that it is identifying these stakeholders as boundary partners and saying these are really our partners without whom we will not be successful. And in the project design, there's an intentionality in coming up with particular activities to do with these particular stakeholders so that they can have the desired behavioral change. So it's really intentional, okay? And then, of course, you can ask which strategies worked and what didn't work. And how successful were you in keeping people involved? Because sometimes you start off with a lot of ginger and they very gingerly, they're involved, and then you start throwing them off because guess what? You were running out of time, our milestones are not moving, whatever. You start to exclude the stakeholders because engaging them will waste time. No. Did you provide any training or any support? What has been helpful? What could have been improved? Did your stakeholder analysis management efforts have the desired effect? Were they helpful? Did stakeholder involvement improve the work effectiveness or political and community support of the effort? So these are some of the questions that you can ask yourself as you evaluate your stakeholder engagement process. So extremely critical and very helpful. And remember, communities are complex. The development agenda is complex. The challenges in a community is complex. It requires systems thinking, and part of it means that we acknowledge as development practitioners that we cannot do it on our own. We need to partner with fellow stakeholders, and we need to do it in a systematic way so that we are able to really see how effective it is and to improve it as we need to. So I would like to just stop there. We have about 5 minutes for any questions and so forth. Yes, so over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Zivayi, for the wonderful presentation. Kindly let's give her a round of applause. I think you'll agree with me, this is a morning well spent, an afternoon well spent for those for whom it is afternoon, and also for those who are in the evening. I think this is so 50 minutes well spent. Thank you, madam. As we post our questions on the chat, I will possibly want just to, as she gets reorganized and just catches her breath, request that we take a photo, a group photo, and we'll ask Meredith to do that. In the event you would wish not to appear in the photograph, kindly you can shut down your video for purposes of consent. So Meredith, over to you.
Okay, is everybody ready? So everyone has their video on that wants to be in the picture?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. So I'll give you like a 3, 2, 1 countdown. So 3, 2, 1. All right, great job, everybody.
Thank you, Meredith. So that goes into, again, part of the communications from IACD, and she'll be sharing the recording on IACD website so that then you can catch up with in more detail what has already been shared by Dr. Zivayi in greater detail. And so any clarification, any questions? But before we go to that, this is a monthly series of webinars from the region. But then, of course, you'll also notice that we are going into the festivity season. And so you know that we usually have our meetings every second Wednesday. We are proposing that we skip January and then we can do it in February 10th. And so we'll give the communication in good time so that, again, we can come and continue to learn together and support each other in community development practice. And the last announcement from me is that, again, World Community Development Conference 2020 was supposed to be there, but then COVID has pushed it to 2021, June 21st to 23rd in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm extending the welcome to you. We are receiving abstracts, and early bird registration is on until the end of January. Then after that, we go into the late bird registration. You are welcome, so that then we can come to Nairobi and celebrate community development practice. Hopefully, with the vaccine coming into the scene, international travel is likely to be much easier, hopefully. So you're welcome and best wishes. So over to you. Any clarifications? There was one which possibly you could start with as we post others.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. I see from Nuhadi, I think, I hope I pronounced it well, in Indonesia. She says that she agrees the engaging stakeholder in our community development projects is very useful with different levels of involvement according to their degree and power and interest. However, focusing on engagement sometimes takes additional steps, and as a result makes our project longer, costly, and more complicated. How do you consider the importance between stakeholder engagement and schedule compliance project management? Yes, this is a very good question. Now, the way I have now started to think about it is that when you are designing a new project, you need to thoroughly think through who the stakeholders are. So it becomes part of your needs assessment process. So you identify these stakeholders and you already think about the stakeholder engagement strategy and the stakeholder management strategy. And when you have thought this through at the planning stage, you also budget for it. You don't only budget for it, but you also provide timelines, and you have adequate justification to present to your donor why it is important to make budgetary provisions. And most of the time, a lot of donor templates now require for us to talk about sustainability. And a lot of the sustainability of the changes or sustainability of the impacts and outcomes is achieved because we have involved the stakeholders who are in situ in the communities or who have a permanent mandate to engage in those particular areas. For example, if you are dealing with health, it's the Ministry of Health in the community. So they are going to be there beyond the life of the project. It can become very useful to build their capacities in specific ways. So how do you balance it? Plan for it. Don't start to identify stakeholders after your project has already been approved by the donor and you didn't budget for it, you didn't put time for it. But if you have an ongoing project and this has happened, this is what you can do. You can actually, during your interim reports, indicate this to the donor and ask for an adaptation of the project and for realignment of your budgets, because there is no point in continuing and you can clearly see that this is not going to be sustainable just because of these issues. Please let me just tell my people in the next meeting that I'm coming in.
Sure, please.
Okay, that's okay. Let's continue. I just asked them for 5 more minutes. So that is important. I hope that is helpful. And then let me see if there's another question. I think, okay, somebody is going for a lecture. That's Anthony. And then, yes, you can, outcome mapping actually has a website. If you go on outcome mapping, it's not the only way, but it's one of the interesting, very intentional ways, and it applies a lot of systems thinking there, and I like it quite a lot. So who else? I think that's basically it. Oh, okay, Emmanuel here is saying, how do we deal with political interference and polarization, which usually results in some stakeholders taking entrenched positions? I think one of the things that happens in politically volatile spaces, when you do a desktop profiling of your stakeholders, you also know what their interests are. Politicians are looking for a platform so that they can probably start to talk about what is not related to the project or even be associated with the success. And what I have discovered with politicians is that they are generally very sober people when you engage them one-on-one to say that we are apolitical, the funders are apolitical, and when this community develops, you will get some of the credit. You remember what we said about sharing credit. You will get credit for creating a conducive environment in which development practitioners can operate without being threatened. So that you will be credited for. So help us to be successful, because at the end of the day, you will gain some credit. So you have to be very smart about understanding what their interests are. So that you are not compromising your standards, but you are also engaging them to bring them to your side so that they are not detrimental to the program. So that can also be very useful. And then Cynthia said there was an example gave on meeting the community practical gender needs, so what would you have missed before? I'm not understanding the question, Cynthia. What are you saying? Is Cynthia online?
The question is, you had given an example of a community that they didn't have water.
Yeah.
So what would you have missed before that would make you not to be in that position of leaving the community, and yet you had money to give to them on something? Yeah.
Well, what we would have done before was that before we applied for the funding, we would have gone to the community to engage with the stakeholders so that we identify the problems together. The community was eventually going to get to the place where they need to have adequate food resources for their livestock. It was the prioritization which was not in line with the community. If we had not sat in our offices to coin up a proposal without asking them, and if we had started with them and discussed together, we would have gotten to that good place.
Thank you.
Yes. I don't know if, okay. I think, Daniel, that looks like that is it. I'm just going to put some people want some information from me personally or to continue with the discussion. I have just put my Gmail address, which is what I use for my membership. So you can pick it up from here. Hamidu, you can pick it up from there as well. And just drop me a note, and yes, then we can have a further discussion of this. This is a topic that we can spend quite some days talking about, because there are so many perspectives, but I hope that what we have done today has just managed to just whet your appetites to be more interested in being intentional about community engagement. Thanks, Daniel. Back to you.
Thank you very much, and a lot of applause as we release her to go to the next meeting.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that, end of year, I'm just back to back. I would have loved to stick around longer, but next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the support to
Thank you very much.
South African region, and
Thank you.
looking forward to meeting you on February 10th for the 7th edition of the webinar series.
Thank you. Thank you so
Have
much.
the best of your morning, afternoon, and evening. Bye-bye, and enjoy your season, holiday season.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.